Nature's first green is gold, her hardest hue to hold. Her early leaf's a flower, but only so an hour, then leaf subsides to leaf, so Eden sank to grief, so dawn goes down to day, nothing gold can stay. Hi, I'm Aaron from Living Science Videos. So why are most of the first leaves that we see in spring green, and why do some of the leaves turn yellow, orange, and brown toward the colder months at the end of the year? And some leaves, like holly, that we see during the holidays, we call evergreen because they keep their green all year round. And leaves that stay alive and green for more than 2 years are called perennial and are not likely the leaves that Robert Frost was referring to in his poem, Nothing Gold Can Stay. Some plants wither and die every year, depressing poets and sensitive souls like Frost. They are called annuals. But this is science, and we want to know why leaves are the color they are, and why do some of them change colors? And if you missed the intro to photosynthesis video or already know this part, a brief recap. Most leaves are green because of the color pigments that they use to trap light energy from the sun. Of all the colors that you can see in the visible light spectrum, the color that they absorb the least and that gets used the least and reflected back is green. The colors that get absorbed the most and that are used the most are red and blue-violet. So knowing this, you might hypothesize that leaves change color in response to how much light they receive from the sun. Why is light so important to plants that they adapted to change colors in response to it? To answer that, we have to take a closer look at how they process and use the energy from the sun. Good scientists make observations and ask testable questions to form explanations for what they see in nature. The first scientist to connect sunlight with oxygen production in plants was Jan Ingenhousz in 1779. Oxygen is a byproduct of the process plants use to make energy from sunlight, carbon dioxide, and water into an energy-storing sugar molecule called glucose. And remember this equation, kids. It will return to haunt you throughout your school years. Evidence for the fact that heterotrophs co-evolved with plants is that we use the same chemicals, minus the sunlight, in reverse order to produce chemical energy in a process called cellular respiration, which we talked about in another video. Remember this formula too. The fact that plants can process sunlight directly makes them autotrophs, which makes organisms like us heterotrophs. So we kind of got a bum deal there. We have to consume other organisms for their energy to stay alive, which is why heterotrophs are also called consumers. But bonus for us, we get to move around on our own. Plant life can be kind of slow, but they really don't think about it, so it doesn't much bother them. Now, where was I? Oh yeah, Jan Ingenhousz and his discovery of the relationship between sunlight and oxygen production in plants. It's 1779, so scientists don't quite have the entire theory of photosynthesis mapped out yet. That's going to take a few more discoveries. But Ingenhousz's discovery is important. He observed that aquatic plants only produce oxygen bubbles in the water during the day in the sunlight, but not at night. So he concluded that plants use sunlight to produce oxygen, and this is one part of the puzzle of photosynthesis. He built his conclusion on the prior knowledge of plants from the work of botanist Joseph Priestley in 1771. Priestley used a bell jar, candle, and a plant to conclude that plants produce oxygen. And you can do this experiment in yourself, just do it with a responsible person. Don't play with fire. Another scientist in 1845, Julius Robert Mayer, built on their work and concluded that plants convert light energy into chemical energy. Before we get to the next important contributor to the theory of photosynthesis, let's answer the question, why do some leaves change color? Bet you thought I forgot. So our scientists so far have discovered that plants convert sunlight into chemical energy. So let's think about what we already know about plants, color pigments, and sunlight. Some plant leaves are green during the spring and summer, and yellow or orange and brown in the fall and winter. What time of the year has less sunlight? It's colder and has less liquid water available. When leaves are green, they are actively performing photosynthesis and converting light energy into chemical energy. And there's a chemical inside leaves called chlorophyll, and this is where leaves get their green pigment. Chlorophyll helps plants to absorb sunlight. In photosynthetic eukaryotes, organisms whose cells have a nucleus, photosynthesis happens inside those cells in an organelle called chloroplast, which, as you might have already guessed, is where chlorophyll is with its special properties to absorb sunlight. In this diagram of a chloroplast, the green stacks inside that look like poker chips filled with chlorophyll are called thylakoids. When you see them stacked together like this, they're called grana. It's a good thing they are filled with chlorophyll, absorbing all that sunlight, because the reactions that create and store energy for the leaves are dependent on light. That's why they're called the light-dependent reactions. Not very creative naming, but it gets the job done. If we want funny botany names, we can always remember funny plant names like the sneezeweed, which was a weed that made people sneeze the clear mucus out of their nose. And that's the same thing we were just talking about, naming something what it is. Although it's also a funny story about a poor unfortunate plant that was harvested to make people sneeze. How about the Chilean pine, which also has a less literal and boring name, the monkey puzzle tree, because an Englishman in the 1800s was puzzled how a monkey could climb it. Even more puzzling is that there were no monkeys in that area. Anyway, we were talking about light-dependent reactions, which is genius as far as naming goes when you think about it, especially compared to the monkey puzzle tree. There are two types of reactions that go on in the chloroplast. The light-dependent reaction and the thylakoids, and, wait for it, the light-independent reactions that happen in the stroma. The stroma is sort of like a cytoplasm in heterotrophic cells, where, if you watch the video on cellular respiration, is the place where the heterotrophic energy-making process of glycolysis happens. Stroma is a fluid-filled space inside the chloroplast. If you look at this diagram, light and water enter the thylakoids and oxygen is produced as a byproduct, which our clever scientists from before Priestley and Ingenhousz noticed earlier in history. This is, of course, the light-dependent reaction phase of photosynthesis, because without light it ain't happening. Oxygen is produced as a waste product in this phase, but not only that. Energy in the form of an energy-storing molecule, ATP, or adenosine triphosphate, is produced, and a hydrogen-carrying molecule called NADPH. That process will send that energy-packed molecule to the light-independent reaction phase in the stoma. When it is done there, it is stripped of one of its phosphates to release the energy to become adenosine diphosphate, or ADP, instead. Then it may cycle back to the light-dependent phase along with the electron carrier molecule NAD+, or nicotinamide adenine dinucleotide phosphate. So basically, the light-dependent reaction phase is all about capturing sunlight, and with ADP and NADPH recycled from the light-independent reaction, it makes ATP. The thylakoids where this is happening are the site of the electron transport chain. Water molecules, with the help of sunlight, are split into positively charged hydrogen electrons. This is where the oxygen that Priestley and Ingenhousz noticed is released as a byproduct into the atmosphere. Rudolf Marcus won the Nobel Prize for discovering the electron transport chain in 1992. The reaction between the positively charged hydrogen ions and the negatively charged electrons in the electron transport chain caused the last structure, ATP synthase, to spin. The ATP synthase structure attaches a phosphate to ADP, making it ATP again. The ATP is needed to help power the light-independent phase, which of course doesn't use light, just like the name says. This phase creates even more energy with the aid of carbon dioxide for the plant to store in the form of glucose to use whenever necessary. It is also named the Calvin cycle after Melvin Calvin, who in 1948 sequenced the path that carbon takes to form glucose. In order to understand the cycle, you first have to follow the path that carbon takes. Carbon can form amazing organic structures. Its structure allows it to make many different molecules that are useful to organisms. It's the tinker toy of biology. In the beginning of the light-independent reaction process, 6 carbon dioxide molecules enter the chloroplast from the atmosphere. In the stroma, they are combined with 5 carbon molecules called rubiscu to form 12 3-carbon molecules. Before these molecules can make it about halfway through that process, they produce ADP and NADPH that returns to the light-dependent process. At the halfway mark, 2 of the 3 carbon molecules break off and are used in the production of the all-important glucose and lipids and amino acids that the plant needs. The remaining 10 3-carbon molecules are broken back down into 5 carbon molecules that join carbon dioxide to start the cycle again. Now that we know more about the process of photosynthesis, why do leaves change color? We've already talked about the green pigment in the chlorophyll. What about the yellow, orange, red, and brown pigments in some leaves? Well, first, the colors yellow and orange were already there all along. You just couldn't see them when photosynthesis was in full swing. Yellow comes from a pigment called xanthophyll. It is the same pigment that makes other foods like bananas yellow. Orange comes from a pigment called keratin, which is also found in foods like carrots. So we were answering the question about why some leaves change color, and as a bonus you got the answers to why is a banana yellow and why are carrots orange. But what stops the photosynthesis process so that you can see those pigments? The most obvious answer is that there is less sunlight in fall and winter, and also it's colder. Also important is that there's less liquid water available in the colder months. Leaves need water to transport food between the leaves and the rest of the plant. A plant that is an annual withers and dies, but some plants can live off the glucose they were busy producing in the sunnier months. Red and purple leaves are from the pigment anthocyanin, which are commonly found in foods like apples and beets. The red pigment is from a stored glucose. Lastly, brown leaves are full of a waste product called tannin. They fall off on perennials, and new leaves grow when it's sunnier in the spring. One of nature's most majestic spectacles is simply the food production cycle of plants responding to the sun. Do you think Robert Frost would be amazed to learn that? Maybe. Or would he also continue to mourn the greenery from spring?